Welcome once again to another edition of our program, The Catholic View for Women. News and views from a truly Catholic perspective, all about women and for women. We're so happy you joined us on another edition of our program. And of course, I'm joined by my co-host. My name is Teresa Tomeo, and I'm joined by Astrid Bennett Gutierrez and Janet Morana. And on this edition, we're going to talk about a very serious problem in our country, in our world, in marriages, in families. It's something that's affecting so many people. Probably someone you know, maybe in your own backyard, is affected by the ills of pornography. And Janet, we want to just start out and ask you just by saying that this topic is so important because it has really become so much more mainstream, unfortunately.
Exactly. You know, I could think years ago you only saw pornography, you know, in the kind of behind the counter, these little
the adult bookstores and the movie theaters.
Right, but now with the internet, it is all over. It has
well,
exploded.
Your iPhones, everything.
Right.
You know.
And you know, the Parents Television Council has recently come out with some statistics, and I'm sure these are on the low end, conservative, but just at that, pornography earns about $20 billion annually. All right. And of course, that reminds me of the abortion industry with the amount of money they make. 75% of content on TV is sexual. And then a reference to sex occurs 8 times an hour on TV.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy. Now, think about how much your kids are glued to the TV
Well,
set.
the statistics for television in terms of, well, actually media overall, the Kaiser Family Foundation, which does a lot of research in this area, which I quote all the time on the air and in my books, 53 hours a week. That's how much time kids spend, young people spend with the media. Adults aren't much better, about 40 to 42 hours a week. Now, we wish every single person out there was spending most of their time watching Catholic television and listening to Catholic radio, EWTN, but that's not the case. So imagine this message of sexual promiscuity and looking at people as objects over and over and over again.
Exactly. Even in the Hispanic community, we have the soap operas, telenovelas, which could qualify as a soft porn. And we see these programs so passively. In my home, the TV was on all the time. And we watch these images, and slowly we become desensitized to them. Unfortunately, we fail to be scandalized sometimes by this, and it really can qualify as pornography. It's very damaging.
Isn't that something that Eduardo speaks out a lot about?
Absolutely. He was in the middle of all those productions, and so now he says that was not good for family, for women, and now he wants to do something different and portray the Hispanic man as somebody who is a family man with traditional values. So we really have a lot of hope, I think, in the media.
God willing. Well, Astrid, why don't we start out with a beautiful quote from Scripture from 1 Corinthians.
Yes, it's from 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies.
No, that is so powerful. And this quote that we're going to give you next is a very, very interesting one because it comes from someone that you wouldn't expect to talk about this issue. And I think this is key. And her name is Gail Dines, and I quote her in my latest book, Extreme Makeover. And she's a sociology professor at Wheatlock College in Boston, and she's an author and an anti-porn activist. Now, what's interesting is she describes herself as a pro-choice feminist. So she's on the other side of the issues with us, but at the same time, she's talking about the fact that nobody else on her side of the fence is talking about the objectification of women that occurs in pornography. And here's a quote from her. She says, many on the liberal left adopt a view that say pornographers are not businessmen, but are simply there to unleash our sexuality from state-imposed constraints. And she says, trust me, I have interviewed hundreds of pornographers, and the only thing that gets them excited is profit.
That's right.
But where are the NARO pro-choice Americans?
Where's National Organization for Women, who is supposedly standing up for women? Right. How come they're not outraged about pornography? And also, how come they're not outraged about the women who are doing the pornography? How they're being abused by these people who are making the films and all that.
Sex trafficking.
Abortions. I mean, these directors of these porn films literally take these women off for abortions. And we're talking about young girls, younger and younger, the age, and it has to do with the sex trafficking. And how come they're not outraged at that? They're not, because why? They're so in bed with the abortion industry, and the pornography is just like feeding into that too. So they're all entangled together.
We were talking about this in preparation for this show, that it all goes back really to this, contraceptive mentality, and we'll talk about that more after the break. Because once you take, the gift of sexuality, which is meant, of course, as God ordained it between the husband and wife, primarily obviously for procreation and within the marriage, once you take it out of that context, everything, you know, it completely starts to implode upon
That's
itself.
right.
So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Janet is going to introduce us to an expert in the area of pornography whom she had the opportunity to interview recently, and he has some stunning statistics and what's happening not only with men in these issues and families, but with women as well. So ladies, stay tuned for the rest of this program on pornography on our latest edition of The Catholic View for Women, and don't forget to visit our website, thecatholicviewforwomen.com. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Catholic View for Women, and we're going to continue our discussion on pornography. Well, you know, ladies, recently I had a great opportunity to talk to Dr. Peter Klopanis, and he is a Catholic psychotherapist, and he is an expert in this field. So let's take a look at that clip now.
Okay.
Pornography for men is a very addictive substance, and we now have the neuroscience to prove it. It's physically addictive and emotionally addictive, and it really can take over their entire lives and have a serious effect on their marriage. For the women who are involved with this, when they find out their husbands are looking at pornography, they're devastated. They see it as serious as an extramarital affair. Trust has been broken, which can take a long time to rebuild. It also affects their self-esteem and their self-image. Most of the women who perform in pornography are between the ages of 18 and 25, and they've had multiple plastic surgeries, and thanks to digital imaging and makeup, they don't exist in real life. So a married woman, she's maybe in her 30s or her 40s, she's had a few children, she's very beautiful, but she's not 18 anymore. And she sees these women that her husband is looking at, and she thinks to herself, how can I compete? My husband must think I'm the ugliest, most unattractive, undesirable woman on the planet. So they are just totally devastated by this. Many wives actually experience symptoms of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of the betrayal that they experience from this. So it definitely has a huge impact on their lives. As I said before, trust has been broken. Many of these women feel that, you know, their husband is this person that they don't even know because he's had this secret life all along. A lot of men go into marriage already addicted, and their wives don't even know about it. So they think, who is this person? Who did I marry? What did I get myself into? And there's a lot of fear in that. If they have children, their respect for their husbands is diminished because they think to themselves, how can I view my husband as a good role model for my children if he's looking at this? How can I see him as a good role model for my sons if he's looking at this stuff? Are my daughters protected because he's looking at these young girls? What's going to happen? So there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fears that wives experience when they discover their husbands are viewing pornography. When a woman discovers that her husband is looking at pornography, she's often very confused. She doesn't know what to do, where to go, where to seek help. And the first thing I recommend is find a therapist who is trained to deal with sexual addiction and pornography addiction. And then also look for support groups out there that can help her. We've all heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, and then there's Al-Anon, which is for family members of alcoholics. Well, for men who are addicted to pornography, there's Sexaholics Anonymous, and then there's S-Anon for the wives and family members. They can find out about them and join those groups and get a lot of good information. They need to educate themselves on what is going on, or educate themselves about pornography, the effects of it, the addictiveness of pornography. They need to know what is going on there. And wives really need to understand that it's not about them. Often they feel that because their husbands are viewing pornography that they're rejecting their wives, and they're not. It's really not about their wives. The pornography is simply the drug of choice. There are many deep emotional wounds and conflicts that these men are struggling with, and they're looking for something to self-medicate with. If it wasn't pornography, it would have been alcohol, it would have been drugs, it would have been gambling, all right? That just happens to be the drug of choice. So women have to realize that they're not at fault, they're not to blame, they don't need to think that they're prudes. One of the dangers that a lot of women need to be aware of is that when they find their husbands are viewing pornography, they may think, well, it's because they weren't sexual enough with their husbands. And they think that the way to address this is to be overly sexual with their husbands. And that's not the way to deal with it either. In fact, that can actually feed the addiction. So they have to realize that it's not their fault. They don't have to take any of these drastic measures to deal with it. What they need to do is get help, find a therapist, find a support group, educate yourself on what this is all about, and then you'll be able to address this issue from an informed stance. Right now, within the church, assistance for women, I'd have to say, is pretty slim. I really don't know of any groups or organizations that a woman can go to. We need groups like that. We need women to stand up and say, hey, this is a problem and we need help. It would be wonderful if women's ministries in parishes were to address this and really provide help for it, but right now there really isn't much. We're just beginning to see men's ministries starting to address this. Here in the Philadelphia area, there's a ministry called the King's Men. Out in the Midwest, there's one called That Man Is You. So there are ministries being started for men, but we really need them for women. We do. For women who are separated or divorced, this is something that could be really well addressed in support groups for separated and divorced Catholics. The American Association of Marriage Attorneys, also known as divorce attorneys, did a study on this, and they found that pornography played a significant role in over 50% of all divorces. If it wasn't the main cause, it was a significant cause. So this is something that could really be addressed in these groups for separated and divorced Catholics. Women are more and more becoming addicted to internet pornography, but it's not like men. Often when we think of pornography, we think of visual images, but it expands beyond that. Of course, women are not visually stimulated like men. So many of them are not going to be attracted to the visual pornography, the pictures and the videos. In fact, many of them look at that and they don't understand what the big deal is about it. They're just not attracted to it. Women are more relationally oriented than men. They're looking for a relationship. And so what's happening now is women are becoming addicted to internet chat rooms where they can go online, and of course in a chat room you can be anybody you want to be. You could be a tall, voluptuous, blonde supermodel. And you can engage in a relationship, a chat relationship with men, which often become very sexual. It's as if they're writing their own romance novels. And so what's happening is that they're engaging in these fantasy relationships. Often it's women who are very lonely that are turning to these types of chat rooms. And it's not just the single women who are turning to it. Married women who are very lonely in their marriages can turn to these and become addicted. Right now, when it comes to internet pornography addiction, the division is it's 83% men and 17% women. This is because visual pornography has been around for centuries. But for women, the chat rooms have only been around since the advent of the internet in the early 90s. But I believe as time goes on, we will see those percentages starting to change and more women are going to become addicted to this. For a woman who finds that either she is struggling with this internet pornography addiction or someone she knows is struggling, she needs to get help. Again, finding a therapist who is trained to deal with this, especially a good woman therapist who understands this, who understands addictions and can help her. Again, groups like Sexaholics Anonymous can be very helpful. If it's for someone she knows, S-Anon can be very helpful. There are many books out there now on sexual addiction and pornography addiction that can be read for information on where to get help. I think the key thing here is to realize is that there is help available, that people are now recognizing that, yeah, these are addictive substances, and there is therapy, there are support groups, there's a lot of help out there, so there's no need to despair.
That was amazing information from Dr. Klopanis. And if you'd like to really know more about him, he has a website. It's called integrityrestored.com. And up there it's a wealth. I mean, what we saw just now, ladies, was just a snapshot.
Right.
But go to his website, in depth, all kinds of information. You'll be astonished, really.
He said something interesting, well, a lot of interesting things, but I think the point that he made about many men going into marriage are already addicted.
Already addicted, right.
And the impact that that would have on that relationship, trying to start your marriage out. Can you imagine?
Yeah, well, you know, I have a friend of mine, a very good friend, dear friend, and that was exactly what happened to her. You know, she got married, well, I would say just very quickly, right out of college, and she didn't even know about pornography, and for goodness sakes.
Was she your age, or is she?
Yeah, she's like my age now.
So back then, that was when
that would be like in the early 70s.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the time frame. And so pornography wasn't like something you really heard about, talked about, you know, not like today. And she started confiding with some of her friends, you know, like, gee, my husband, you know, it's like constantly looking for sex and not wanting to look at, you know, NFP or any of these other things. And unfortunately, she fell into contracepting. But then she told me how when she would go over to his relatives' homes, that the men would all get together and watch porno films. The first family gathering after their wedding. Right. And she was shocked at this. And the wives then would come in after they watched one film. For the second film, like the women were in the kitchen having coffee, and they would come in and watch the second film. And she said how uncomfortable she felt. And she didn't realize, you know, like what was going on. And finally she would make an excuse, oh, I have to go to the restroom or in the house and this and that. And it kind of like, but this drove her crazy. And then she discovered one day, you know, doing laundry, putting her husband's socks away, inside his sock drawer were all these VHS tapes. And she realized that when she wasn't around, he was watching pornography.
So he was addicted.
Right. So he was addicted. Again, she wasn't like really understanding how this was affecting her marriage. But then as her marriage was beginning to fall apart, she began, you know, as she went to talk to a spiritual director and was having all these struggles, she realized that this was a major problem. The sad thing is, he did not want to face his addiction. He did not want to go for counseling, and eventually their marriage, you know, ended in divorce. But it was, like Dr. Klopon has pointed out, it's a key thing that is destroying marriages right now. And very often the woman, that's what she was doing to herself. She was blaming herself. There must be something wrong with me.
If I was prettier, if I was right.
Yeah, maybe I've gained a few pounds, or, you know, so then they start dieting, and some women actually become anorexic because of this, because they're trying to keep up with this false image. And especially as Dr. Klopon has pointed out, if you've had a few children, all right, so you gain a few extra pounds, your shape changes slightly. If these men are addicted to pornography, they have this false image, and the woman thinks, oh, I'm not keeping up, and he's disappointed in me. And it's very sad, you know, what it does and how it destroys your whole self-image, because you think you're trying to compete with this false thing that exists, and you don't even realize it's an addiction, because that's the problem. It's not spoken about as an addiction.
But pornography is addicting, very addicting. And as a matter of fact, it's more addicting, they say, or as addicting, especially for men, because of what it does to the brain. Exactly. They compare it to the addiction of crack cocaine, believe it or not.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's how powerful it is.
The same part of the brain that becomes addicted is affected as well.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting. We were talking before the break about how this all goes back to contraception, and it really does. I mean, it's just phenomenal in terms of if you look at what the church has said. You know, I think a lot about, especially what we're going through in our day and age with everything that's happening in our country, with this push for contraception and all these different things. I keep thinking about what it must have been like for Pope Paul VI, because the pressure he must have been under and the strength it must have taken him to stand strong with Humanae Vitae and the teachings. And I just want to read a quote, and this is going to be part of our homework assignment. But this just, when I was researching this topic for my books, it just really gave me such a comfort that the church, an affirmation that the church, her teachings are so clear. Right. So he's talking about in Humanae Vitae, it's known as, they call it the contraceptive encyclical, but it's much more than that. But he says, among other things, it is also to be feared that the man, growing used to the employment of anti-conceptive practices, may finally lose respect for the woman, and no longer caring for her physical and psychological equilibrium, Janet, that's what you were saying about your friend, may come to the point of considering her as a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment and no longer as his respected and beloved companion.
Right.
Hello.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the church. This is
it.
You know, almost 50 years ago now, right?
Yeah.
Well over 40 years ago.
And my friend would confide in me that stories like one time her daughter was in the hospital and she had to stay a few nights, you know, because she was in pediatric unit, and her husband was furious at her because he wasn't there to be in the bedroom with her for sex. And so you see how this addiction can, you know, it drives into all this stuff. And she was saying to herself, this is not normal. my place is with my sick child, and he as a father should be happy that I'm there with his daughter. But instead it was reversed to this other kind of behavior.
Wow.
So it just shows you the pull of pornography and this sexual addiction. And of course they were contracepting in their marriage too, which leads back to what Paul, and if you think of the timing, this Umana Vitae came out in '68, and my friend got married in about '75. So you see, like, you know, like all that contraception was just all over the place, you know.
Absolutely.
So, and even in couples getting married in that era, you could go to one pre-Cana here where a priest would tell you it's okay to contracept, and you could go to another one where they would say it's a sin. So, you know, the whole thing was permeating our culture, and pornography. Like I said, back in the '70s, it was kept more quiet. You know, I remember if you went to get these porno magazines, the clerk would give it to them in a brown paper bag, like Playboy, Hustler. That was like, those were pre-pornography day kind of publications. But now it's just so widespread, and with the internet, it's just amazing.
That's why it's so important in the church. We promote, first of all, natural family planning. What an antidote to all of this, where it's
theology
based
of the
on
body.
theology of the body.
Right.
So I think natural family planning has to be taken out of the constraints we've put it in. It has to be talked about in homilies, I believe, in different ways, so that the family can benefit from this beautiful teaching. So it's natural that young people know about it, even before they enter pre-Cana. Also, when I was younger, I started, I actually signed up for prayers from E5 Men, based on Ephesians 5.
Oh, I remember that. I've heard about that before.
It's a ministry to help men overcome addiction to pornography, among other things. They're making reparation for having offended women or used a woman, and they also pray for single moms. They pray for women in crisis pregnancies.
Wow.
So we can sign up to be prayed from these men, and basically what it's based on is prayer and fasting. So these men are praying and fasting for this demon of pornography, of all these, in the culture of death. So the church has all these answers that we have to promote. Two wonderful advocates that I just want to highlight are Jason Everett and Matt Frad, who are from Catholic Answers, who are doing wonderful work in chastity, but also recognizing that part of the chastity message, especially for men, has to be pornography, and how easily nowadays you can't even drive a car without being offended by a billboard.
Or a billboard,
so
at
they're
a
proposing,
store, or Victoria's Secret, or it's just everywhere.
Yes.
We only have a few minutes left, and I do want to get to some of the ideas that I have, and many of the ideas that I have for media awareness and activism can be found in my book Noise. Now, it was first published in 2007, but the brand new updated edition just came out in January of 2012, earlier this year. So this is available, of course, on the EWTN catalog. And Catholic Answers Live is a radio program that is syndicated through EWTN, and you can find out more about our radio programs on EWTN.com. Well, first and foremost, what all the experts say is to keep the TVs and other media devices in a central area of the home. Get them out of the bedroom, because a lot of problems can occur when people have time, especially young kids, to themselves, and have access to all that information. Make your mealtime a media-free zone. So therefore, you have time with your spouse, even if you don't have children. That's a very important time in terms of building on your relationship. You come together at the end of the day as a family, as a husband and wife. Make sure the voicemail picks up the phone messages. Keep the TV off. Just have you and your spouse, and if you have children, obviously, use that as a time to connect with your family. And Janet, we've got some homework assignments too right now.
That's right.
And quite a list of resources in the homework assignment.
Yeah, it's a big list. Well, of course, as Teresa just said, her book Noise, but also to her book Extreme Makeover, which is chapter 2, it has a section about this. But then there's some websites that, as your homework, we really want you to go to and delve deeper. So we have moralityinmedia.org, parentstv.org. Then we have, for the Sexaholics Anonymous site, it's just simply sa.org, and that's a very good site. And then there's also the kingsmen.us, and then finally, thatmanisyou.org. All those websites really delve into this topic really greater. And then finally, in the final minute, I want to remind everyone, if we keep our image, the Madonna of the kitchen, nicely displayed in our kitchens, we know this helps, like besides the TV being turned off and the Blackberries put away and the cell phones and the iPads, Our Lady there in the kitchen, Madonna of the kitchen, which is our symbol for this show and something that we kind of have a little devotion to in the kitchen, will really help focus the family at mealtime.
Well, it's so important because we are what we eat, we are what we contemplate, and if we have religious images in our home, it's going to remind us of God and not take us away from God.
That's right.
So great discussion, which we had more time. Again, please go to our website, thecatholicviewforwomen.com, for all of these resources. And we also have some food for thought there, and we have links to the documents that we mentioned, including, of course, Humana Vitae. Pray about this, do a media reality check in your home, and really think about just how much time you are spending with all these different media influences in your life, and don't let the media dominate. Obviously, we love you to stay tuned to EWTN, but there's even time to cut it out completely, to give yourself some quiet time with God and some silence at the foot of the cross. Thanks for joining us. I'm Teresa Tomeo, co-host of The Catholic View for Women, along with my co-hosts, of course, Astrid Bennett Gutierrez and Janet Morana. Thank you for watching us, and we'll see you next time on The Catholic View. And one more reminder, visit us online at CatholicViewForWomen.com. See you next time.